many more inside.
Arlington search and rescue personnel are just now, and it's about almost 2 o'clock, just now gaining access to portions of the building where the plane hit because the fires were too intense.
One ray of hope. The Pentagon is undergoing a major renovation, and some of the offices in the path of the plane were vacant.
We're trying to find out who made it out okay and account for the people that may not have made it out.
When the plane hit, Defense Secretary Rumsfeld dashed from his office on the other side of the building.
And proceeded down towards the impact point in the building. It actually went outside the building and was helpful in getting several people that were injured onto stretchers, and then came back into the building and was in the National Military Command Center.
With smoke hanging in the air of the command center, Rumsfeld ordered aircraft carriers, amphibious ships, cruisers, and destroyers to New York and Washington, where they can serve as floating hospitals, help with the cleanup, and provide air defense against the possibility of more attacks. Rescue efforts are a long way from over, but the FBI is already combing the debris for clues to who was behind this. The Pentagon has put all its bases on the highest state of alert, and the State Department has done the same thing with American embassies around the world. The early suspicion is that Osama bin Laden was behind this, and U.S. officials say eventually there will be military retaliation. Dan?
David Martin reporting live from the Pentagon. President Bush is just reported to have landed at Andrews Air Force Base just outside of Washington. He is said to be going to the White House itself. From there, he will address the American people tonight. We will see and hear it, of course, live on CBS News. As regards the explosions in Kabul, Afghanistan, a senior Pentagon official now says, and I quote him, "That is not a U.S. strike." Repeat, not a U.S. strike. This despite reports from the scene by at least one reporter on the scene who said that it was a missile strike. A senior Pentagon official says it's simply not true. It wasn't a U.S. strike. Now, to punish those behind today's attacks, the United States and its people must first determine who they are. We are a country that believes in facts and the pursuit of facts. The facts are few about who's responsible for this. There has been much speculation, italicize, underscore the word speculation about that today, with Osama bin Laden, the renegade Saudi millionaire, frequently mentioned. No one knows who did this. CBS's Jim Stewart in Washington is following the investigation, checking his sources, and has this live report. Jim?
Dan, apparently we have a little bit more now than just speculation. U.S. intelligence officials and law enforcement no longer have just a theory about today's unprecedented attack. They now have some evidence, and it all points to Osama bin Laden. Sources tell CBS News that hours after the attack, intelligence agents detected what one official is calling significant indicators that the suicide planes were hijacked by members of Al-Qaeda, the terrorist group that reports to bin Laden. Sources describe the intelligence as communications intercepts, but would not provide any details. It's not definitive, said one official, but it is persuasive. Sensing that bin Laden would quickly become a suspect, Afghanistan's ruling Taliban party, which has been giving him safe refuge, called a press conference. "We do not allow Osama bin Laden to operate from our land," the Taliban said, warning the U.S. not to take any, quote, speedy actions to retaliate. Meanwhile, law enforcement sources said there had been no credible claims for the joint attacks and that intelligence had picked up no specific threats aimed at targets inside the United States before the attacks took place. Within minutes of today's attacks, officials were pointing to the 1993 bombing of the World Trade Center by a group with ties to bin Laden, citing it as proof that bin Laden has never given up on his dream to destroy the symbol of America's economic power. And in recent months, analysts say bin Laden has only become more and more sophisticated in his attempts to strike at the United States. They point specifically to his simultaneous attack on 2 U.S. embassies in East Africa.
They also went directly against a U.S. destroyer, which was heavily guarded, and they did put a hole in that ship, the USS Cole. So they have a track record of conducting attacks that one would think they might not be capable of.
Late today, the U.S. intelligence community was rapidly sorting through a priority list of potential suspects within the U.S. for electronic eavesdropping, with sources saying the number may reach into the hundreds. There is also specific physical evidence that investigators are eager to examine. First are the transcripts of communications between the suicide aircraft and ground controllers, and second are cockpit tape recordings of conversations in the doomed aircraft themselves. The working theory is that the hijackers were pilots themselves and forcefully took over the controls to dive the jets straight into their targets. Dan?
Jim Stewart, good work with getting that new information about increasing evidence, real hard evidence, nothing conclusive yet, that bin Laden is tied to this. But do U.S. intelligence officials know where bin Laden is? Still in Afghanistan, Pakistan, Baluchistan? Do they have any idea?
As recently as the beginning of the week, they had reason to believe that he was hanging out in the two locations that he has most frequently been at in Afghanistan, and that's the cities of Jalalabad and Kandahar. Now, he travels frequently, Dan, and he does so by SUV and caravans with sometimes as many as 100 guards. It's a safe bet that he is on the move again tonight.
United States Secretary of Defense, thank you, Jim Stewart. U.S. Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld has begun a briefing at the Pentagon. We pick it up in progress live.
Ladies and gentlemen, as the Secretary just said, today we have watched the tragedy of an outrageous act of barbaric terrorism carried out by fanatics against both civilians and military people. Acts that have killed and maimed many innocent and decent citizens of our country. I extend my condolences to the entire Department of Defense families, military and civilian, and to the families of all those throughout our nation who lost loved ones. I think this is indeed a reminder of the tragedy and the tragic dangers that we face day in and day out, both here at home as well as abroad. I would tell you up front, I have no intentions of discussing today what comes next, but make no mistake about it, your armed forces are ready.
Chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee, Carl Levin.
Our intense focus on recovery and helping the injured and the families of those who were killed is matched only by our determination to prevent more attacks and matched only by our unity to track down, root out, and relentlessly pursue terrorists, states that support them, and harbor them. They are the common enemy of the civilized world. Our institutions are strong, and our unity is palpable.
Senator John Warner.
Thank you. As a past chairman preceding Carl Levin, I can assure you that the Congress stands behind our president, and the president speaks with one voice for this entire nation. This is indeed the most tragic hour in America's history, and yet I think it can be its finest hour, as our president and those with him, most notably our Secretary of Defense, our chairman, and the men and women of the armed forces all over this world stand ready not only to defend this nation and our allies against further attack, but to take such actions as are directed in the future in retaliation for this terrorist act, a series of terrorist acts unprecedented in world history. We call upon the entire world to step up and help, because terrorism is a common enemy to all, and we're in this together. The United States has borne the brunt, but who can be next? Step forward and let us hold accountable and punish those that have perpetrated this attack. Again, I commend the Secretary, the Chairman, and how proud we are. We spoke with our President here moments ago. He's got a firm grip on this situation, and the Secretary and the General have a firm grip on our armed forces and in communication of the world over.
Thank you very much. We'll take a few questions and then we'll adjourn. Charlie.
Mr. Secretary, did you have any inkling at all, in any way, that something of this nature and something of this scope might be planned?
Charlie, we don't discuss intelligence matters.
I see. And how would you respond if you find out who did this?
Obviously, the President of the United States has spoken on that subject, and those are issues that he will address in good time.
Mr. Yes. Secretary, we are getting reports from CNN and others that there are bombs exploding in Kabul, Afghanistan. Are we at the moment striking back, and if so, is the target Osama bin Laden and his organization?
I've seen those reports. They, in no way is the United States government connected to those explosions.
What about Osama bin Laden? Do you suspect him as the prime suspect in this?
It's not the time for discussions like that.
A show of bipartisan support and solidarity at the Pentagon with Secretary of Defense Rumsfeld orchestrating this bipartisan appearance by members of Congress and General Hugh Shelton, the chairman of the Military Joint Chiefs of Staff in Washington.
Beyond comprehension. There are a number of people that they've not identified by name, but identified as being dead, and there are a number of casualties. But the FBI has secured the site, and the information takes time to come. People have been lifted out and taken away in ambulances, and the numbers will be calculated, and it will not be a few.
Mr. Secretary, could you tell us what you saw?
Mr. Secretary, do you consider what happened today, both in New York and here, an act of war?
There is no question but that the attack against the United States of America today was a vicious, well-coordinated, a massive attack against the United States of America. What words the lawyers will use to characterize it is for them.
Secretary of Defense Don Rumsfeld being asked all the obvious questions, and let's just quickly review them before we move. Did they have any inkling of this in advance? The answer is they don't discuss this. Every single piece of evidence we have seen all day says the United States in no way had any inkling of what was going to happen.
It's physically impossible to defend at every time, in every place, against every technique. It is not possible to give guarantees. The people who work in this building do so voluntarily. They're brave people, and they do their jobs well.
Mr. Secretary, can you give a sense of what happened? What did you see when you left your office, ran down to the site, and apparently helped people on stretchers and then returned to the command center?
I felt the shock of the airplane hitting the building, went through the building and then out into the area, and they were bringing bodies out that had been injured, most of which were alive and moving, but seriously injured. And a lot of volunteers were doing a terrific job helping to bring them out of the buildings and get them into stretchers and into ambulances and into airlifts.
Mr. Secretary, can you tell us how many of the dead were soldiers and how many were civilians? Have you been able to determine?
Absolutely not.
Mr. Secretary, today we saw military planes both in New York and in Washington. How much more of a military presence will we see now that this incident has occurred for the next week?
Those kinds of decisions are made day to day. It is correct that we had aircraft flying protective missions at various places in the United States today, and they will do that as appropriate.
Mr. Secretary, what do you say to the American people who may have questions on how something so coordinated has been carried out against this nation? What do you say to them who might not have confidence that our intelligence and our security are what they should be?
I say to them that the President of the United States will be making some remarks to them this evening that will address those subjects.
Mr. Secretary, you've declared, the Pentagon has declared THREATCON Delta forces around the world. Could you tell me why? Have you received any threats, or has anyone claimed credit for this?
We have, in fact, declared Force Protection Condition Delta and a condition of high alert, indeed the highest alert. We did so almost immediately upon the attacks, and it is still in force.
Mr. Secretary, were there threats issued against other U.S. facilities elsewhere in the world today?
I don't know that there's a day that's gone by since I've been in this job that there haven't been threats somewhere in the world to some facility somewhere. It's one of the complexities of the intelligence business that you have to...
That, of course, is we believe that's the President's helicopter.
When you become the President of the United States and the Commander-in-Chief when you're on the campaign trail, but the cold, hard reality has been visited on this president one of the greatest national security crises this country has faced in many, many years within his first year in office. So let's just watch for a moment and see if we can't see the president as he gets off the helicopter, and then under very heavy guard. There's extraordinary security now at the White House. Sharpshooters on the roof. People have been cleared out. Our correspondents are operating from across the street. We'll see whether we can see him as he moves from Marine One into the Oval Office. Nick, we had, as we expected earlier today, the president had a fighter plane escort coming from Omaha back to Washington, and my guess is that he must have had one earlier today when he left Florida and also when he went from Louisiana up to SAC. Jim,
it was shortly after the attacks occurred on the World Trade Center that the Pentagon went into a crisis mode. They were trying to establish exactly what additional threats there may be, and then it was just about 28 minutes after that the airplane hit here. It was after the attack on the Pentagon that the Air Force then decided to scramble F-16s out of the D.C. National Guard Andrews Air Force Base to fly cover, a protective cover over Washington, D.C. It was something straight out of a war zone, Tom. One Air Force officer standing next to me looking up in the sky at the F-16 said, "My God, we're flying cover on the nation's capital."
All right, Jim, let's continue to watch here as the president still is on Marine One. We do expect that momentarily he'll be exiting that helicopter and moving briskly into the Oval Office. Laura Bush, he had talked to earlier today. She had been moved to a secure location. His brother Jeb Bush declared a state of emergency in the state of Florida after the president left today, a contingency that a lot of governors took around the country. Secret Service detail exiting first. There were Secret Service offices and a number of other government offices in the World Trade Center. There's the president now, walking to what will prove to be one of the longest and most important nights of his presidency. Back into the White House Oval Office. We do expect him to address the nation later. His father, obviously, was president during the Operation Desert Storm, the Persian Gulf War. His father had been the ambassador to the United Nations, director of the CIA, and vice president of the United States for 8 years before he occupied the Oval Office. There is very little in your experience as governor of Texas or even as a senator of the United States or almost any other job to prepare you for these kinds of occasions. Let's go to NBC's Campbell Brown. Campbell, what can you tell us about the plans for tonight?
Well, Tom, we're not sure as of yet exactly what time the president will be addressing the nation, but now that we do know that he is back at the White House, he will likely be joining the vice president and the National Security Advisor, Condoleezza Rice, in a room, what's referred to as the Situation Room in the White House. This is a wood-paneled room, extremely secure, in the basement of the West Wing. And in that room is a giant conference room. Around a big table, there are 10 chairs. There are about 20 chairs around the perimeter of the room. And there are 2 giant video screens that can open up where the president and his team can meet and essentially watch all of the communications coming in from around the country, or around the world, rather. Right next to that conference room is a special communications center where 4 people are on staff 24 hours a day, military, State Department, intelligence, who are sifting through all the cables, all the information, providing them instantly to the president and his team. That's where the vice president's been all day with the National Security Advisor and other key personnel. In all likelihood, the president is joining them there now to get an update before he addresses the nation. Tom?
All right, thanks very much, NBC's Campbell Brown. And at his side, he will have veterans of other crises in the national security of this country. Vice President Dick Cheney was Defense Secretary during the Persian Gulf War. Donald Rumsfeld served as Defense Secretary before and also as White House Chief of Staff. Condoleezza Rice has been on the staff of the National Security Council during President George Herbert Walker Bush's administration, President 41 Bush, as they like to describe him. Now back here in New York, as you can see behind me, the billowing smoke, the continuing dust and debris from the collapse of the World Trade Center earlier today, and then Trade Center number 7, a 40-story building that went down. But the World Trade Center, one of the targets of the terrorists today, is one of the most distinctive architectural edifices in the world. The world's largest commercial complex, completed in 1976, an architectural marvel, its details immense. A massive twin structure, 110 stories tall, built of 600,000 square feet of glass and 200,000 tons of steel, 1,350 feet tall, 43,000 windows, 99 elevators, and a home for 1,200 businesses. Businesses where 50,000 people work. Businesses that include commodity exchanges, investment firms, law firms, banks, restaurants, a hotel, government offices. Atop, an observation deck, a renowned tourist attraction. The Trade Center could draw 90,000 additional visitors on a busy day. Today, the Twin Towers, many of those inside, gone. That's just one of the many reasons, of course, that today will be remembered as one of the worst days in the nearly 400-year history of the great city of New York. And NBC's Pat Dawson has been on the streets of New York, very near the World Trade Center throughout most of the day. He's been witness to the heroic rescue efforts that were effected there today. And of course, tonight, Pat, still an unknown number of dead trapped there in the rubble.
Very true, Tom. Police, fire, and emergency workers first on the scene this morning knew they had a catastrophe of unprecedented proportions. What they didn't realize is that after they arrived, it would get worse, and that many of them would be victims as well. Within minutes of the attack, New York rescue crews responded. Dozens of emergency workers running headlong into the chaos, a swirling mass of fire and smoke more than 60 stories up. Chief Albert Turry of the New York Fire Department was one of the first on the scene.
The initial reaction was that it was an absolute terrorist attack.
His job, direct a rescue effort inside the Trade Center. His team of 200 firefighters fanned out into the burning towers to search for survivors.
When that first tower fell, I was trying to evacuate everybody 3 blocks more away from every high-rise building in the area.
But when the towers started crumbling, crashing all around them, the original rescue effort became an exercise in survival, the rescuers themselves running for their lives.
But I'm telling you right now, there wasn't time to evacuate our people.
Most of those that did make it out of the Trade Center covered in debris, ghostly figures coughing and vomiting from the smoke and dust.
It was the most horrific scene I've ever seen in my whole life. We saw the World Trade Center in flames, a big gaping hole all the way on the top of it. We could see people jumping from the top of the building.
At midday, the financial district of Lower Manhattan looks like a war zone. With no idea if another attack is imminent, hundreds of companies throughout New York send their workers home. Bridges and tunnels across the Hudson River are closed. Mass transit shut down.
There are over 1,000 rescue workers, probably about 2,000 that are deployed, trying to get into the buildings, trying to find people, trying to search for people. The governor and I spoke a couple of hours ago. The governor has deployed the National Guard to relieve them because our people are going to need reinforcements pretty soon. But right now they don't want to leave because they're searching for innocent citizens, and they're searching for some of their brothers and sisters.
When rescuers finally got inside the trade towers, the damage left many of them shocked at the near total devastation. There's no way to estimate casualties. Thousands are believed dead. For those used to saving lives, the frustration is overwhelming.
When you start talking to a New York police officer and they start crying for what they've seen in the last couple hours, you know the seriousness and the gravity of the situation.
Throughout the day, rescuers have faced a terrible choice with hundreds, perhaps thousands of people trapped in the rubble in there. When is it safe to go back in? And Tom, the most vivid example of that, referred to by David Bloom a little while ago, that, of course, the loss of Building 7 of the World Trade Center just over my shoulder, which tumbled to the ground 8 hours after this attack began. Tom?
NBC's Pat Dawson in Lower Manhattan tonight, and of course for many of the people who lived through all of that, it will be one of the unforgettable moments of their lives. NBC's Ann Thompson was in the vicinity of the World Trade Center when the buildings began to come down. Ann?
Tom, this is the view tonight down West Broadway. Smoke's filling the air where the two towers in building number 7 stood. In the last hour, we have seen busloads of police, of doctors, and ambulance after ambulance go into that area to try to repair a city that's been mortally wounded by this attack. A direct hit that shattered New York City's confidence.
Well, as soon as the first building collapsed, everybody made a mad dash to just take cover. Everybody just started running. I just happened to duck running to the both of them.
As soon as we got out of the train station, people were screaming and crying and yelling, and it was just total chaos, and the bottom of our building was blown out.
For me, Ground Zero, Fulton and Broadway, about 2 blocks from the World Trade Center, just as the South Tower crumbled. Hollywood could never imagine something like this. A tidal wave of smoke and debris came roaring down Broadway. I was standing at the corner of Fulton and Broadway. I ran into a building, ran between a column and a building at 195 Broadway, and pushed my face and my body into that building. For what seemed like 5 minutes, I was pelted with all kinds of debris. I crouched down, was coughing, trying to breathe. You couldn't get any air. The air was so full of smoke and dust. When it finally settled, I stood up. My glasses were covered with dust. Hours later, I'm still covered with dust. The building that I was in front of, 195 Broadway, the doors were gated shut. They opened the doors, let us in, and inside we were finally able to breathe. It wasn't easy. My eyes were filled with dust. My mouth was filled with dust. I was choking. The people I was with were choking. It was just absolutely horrific. All I could think of was, this is war.
I just heard the rumble, and then I ran like hell, and there was a large wind coming.
Down here, panic. Survivors flee by whatever means they can, fearing more destruction at any moment. At 10:30, I tried to leave the building, but as soon as I got outside, I heard a second explosion and another rumble and more smoke and more dust. I ran inside the buildings, the chandeliers shook, and again, black smoke filled the air. Within another 5 minutes, we were covered again with more silt and more dust. And then a fire marshal came in and said we had to leave because if there was a third explosion, this building might not last.
Everyone, please clear the corner.
Palpable fear as people run through the streets, choking on dust and debris.
Come on, let's go, let's go. We saw the building come down. We all ran, and the walkway held up to save like 40 or 50 of us that were right there. We were buried there, and then cops shot out windows in the next building. The only thing that was in front of us was like these 1-inch windows.
The streets of the financial district covered with debris, in some cases ankle deep. Cars on fire, cars just turned by the force of the explosion. It was like something no one had ever seen. Panic, like smoke, heads uptown. Officials ordering precautionary evacuations of some of New York City's landmarks.
This is an orderly evacuation of 30 Rockefeller Plaza.
On the street, anxious commuters trying to call home, cell phone service dead. At Grand Central Station, travelers desperate to get out of the city.
It's going to take a long time, but you're going to see Mama and Papa today, okay?
Outside the station, a surreal scene. People buying postcards of the Twin Towers that no longer exist. As the day wears on, witnesses who survived the attack now face a new horror, searching for missing friends and co-workers.
We can't account for all of our employees. We're just in a state of shock.
The biggest, busiest city in the world, the attack revives fears of the 1993 bombing. Suddenly, nowhere in the financial district seems safe.
Did you ever think this could happen again? No, I really didn't. I lived through the first one.
After a tragedy so great, tonight a city comes together, searching for safety and comfort.
This is a 27 News special report.
Good evening. I'm Amy Lee.
And I'm Nate Hill. We'll be bringing you a shortened version of our regular 6 o'clock news, and we'll then send you back to NBC's continuing coverage of the attack on America.
Will not be giving up hope until they go through all of this wreckage. Wolf?
Jamie, and just to recap, the devastation at the Pentagon, at that corridor at the Pentagon, several corridors, indeed the result of a hijacked American Airlines flight, Flight 77 from Washington Dulles Airport, scheduled to fly to Los Angeles International, hijacked and flown from Dulles Airport, which is about 15 to 20 miles or so from the Pentagon, crashing into the Pentagon, causing that devastation. Did we get any hard numbers killed and injured in the attack?
No, the Pentagon is absolutely refusing to even speculate, even though we know the numbers are fairly high. For instance, we know that there were 65 people on that plane. We know they all perished. We know that there are people in those offices that were right in an area of the Pentagon that had just been renovated, part of the multi-billion-dollar renovation here at the Pentagon. We know there have been bodies taken out. In fact, Rumsfeld made a comment at one point that he wasn't going to talk about what comes next while they're still removing bodies from the Pentagon. But apparently, in an effort to just stop any speculation about it, they're just not giving any numbers out here on the killed and on the injured.
All right, Jamie, stand by. We're standing by for a briefing at the White House with cabinet members who will brief on the U.S. response, the emergency response that is obviously underway in New York and here in Washington. You're taking a look at a picture of the White House briefing room. We're expecting Joe Alba, the FEMA director, the Secretary of Health and Human Services, Tommy Thompson, and the Attorney General John Ashcroft. In the meantime, let's bring in Senator Chuck Hagel of Nebraska. He's a Republican, he's a member of the Foreign Relations.
President Bush vowed to find and punish the people behind the attacks. Here is what he said, and in a separate statement, the reaction of Secretary of State Colin Powell.
Just before noon, Secretary of State Colin Powell spoke from Lima, Peru, where he cut short his first official visit to South America. Before leaving, he thanked foreign ministers for adopting a message condemning terrorism.
A terrible, terrible tragedy has befallen my nation, but has befallen all the nations of this region, all the nations of the world, befallen all those who believe in democracy. Once again, we see terrorism, we see terrorists, people who don't believe in democracy, people who believe that with the destruction of buildings, with the murder of people, they can somehow achieve a political purpose. They can destroy buildings, they can kill people, and we will be saddened by this tragedy, but they will never be allowed to kill the spirit of democracy. They cannot destroy our society. They cannot destroy our belief in the democratic way. You can be sure that America will deal with this tragedy in a way that brings those responsible to justice. You can be sure that as terrible a day as this is for us, we will get through it because we are a strong nation, a nation that believes in itself.
A short time later, President Bush spoke to reporters at Barksdale Air Force Base in Louisiana. He'd flown there following his education event in Florida.
Freedom itself was attacked this morning by a faceless coward, and freedom will be defended. I want to reassure the American people that the full resources of the federal government are working to assist local authorities to save lives and to help the victims of these attacks. Make no mistake, the United States will hunt down and punish those responsible for these cowardly acts. I've been in regular contact with the Vice President, Secretary of Defense, the National Security Team, and my cabinet. We have taken all appropriate security precautions to protect the American people. Our military at home and around the world is on high alert status, and we have taken the necessary security precautions to continue the functions of your government. We have been in touch with the leaders of Congress and with world leaders to assure them that we will do whatever is necessary to protect America and Americans. I ask the American people to join me in saying a thanks for all the folks who have been fighting hard to rescue our fellow citizens, and to join me in saying a prayer for the victims and their families. The resolve of our great nation is being tested. But make no mistake, we will show the world that we will pass this test. God bless.
The president then flew to the headquarters of the Strategic Air Command in Nebraska.
And the president landed at the White House moments ago. He will address the nation around 9 p.m. Eastern Time. We'll carry that live. About a half an hour ago, Defense Secretary Rumsfeld and General Shelton, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, spoke to reporters in a makeshift newsroom at the Pentagon.
The office, and debris and this big whoosh, the concussion and the shock wave from the explosion went right by the office. Looked back out after most of the debris had flown by, and looked to my right, and there was dark smoke and people coming out of the haze, which time I evacuated my people.
Stanley's last comment to us on the phone today: America will never be the same again.
Also in Washington today, Senator Sam Brownback. He and other members of Congress were taken to a special safe area after this morning's attack. Brownback, Senator Pat Roberts, and our representatives Jim Ryan, Todd Tiehart, Jerry Moran, and Dennis Moore are all safe tonight. Brownback says what's important now is for the country to unite.
We've got to pull together as a nation. We're a large, diverse nation, and we frequently are divided, but we've got to pull together as a country when you have this kind of terrorism taking place. As I say, incredible attacks on our homeland that we haven't experienced this level of a coordinated attack on our country since Pearl Harbor. We've got to pull together again.
Senator Brownback serves on the Foreign Relations Committee, and through that, a subcommittee dealing with South Asia and the Middle East. Senator Roberts serves on the Armed Services and Intelligence Committees, as well as a select committee on terrorism and threats. Obviously, both expect to be highly involved in this situation as discussions for who's responsible continue over the coming days. Governor Bill Graves calls today's attack on innocent men, women, and children a great American tragedy. He outlined some of the steps he's taken in response to the crisis. The Kansas Emergency Management System is activated and continues to monitor the situation. He has placed all National Guard facilities on high security status. All appropriate security measures are being taken at major state offices.
Cooperating in this investigation. The FBI has established a website where people can report any information about these crimes. That address is www.ifccfbi.gov. That address again, www.ifccfbi.gov. Individuals can report any information they know about these crimes to that website. It takes courage for individuals to come forward in situations like this, and I urge anyone with information that may be useful and helpful to authorities to use this opportunity. The Office of Victims of Crime has established a toll-free 800 number for family and friends of victims. They can call 800-331-0075 to leave contact information for a future time when more information is available, to find out information about a victim, or to find out information about the rights of victims and the services available to victim survivors and victim families. The determination of these terrorists will not deter the determination of the American people. We are survivors, and freedom is a survivor. A free American people will not be intimidated, nor will we be defeated. We will find the people responsible for these cowardly acts, and justice will be done. Tommy?
Every single American lost something today. And every one of us at this time expresses our deepest sympathy to the victims of today's tragedies and the continue to answer that call. No matter where you live, please do your civic duty and assist us by donating blood. As our primary job is to make sure Americans harmed by this tragedy get the help that they need. We will remain in constant contact with the governors, the mayors, public health officials, and other local officials to make sure that all their needs are being met. It is a sad day, but America and all of its citizens certainly share tonight in the grief that it's been caused. And as the President and everybody in his administration have said, we, the government, will continue to operate and continue to provide the services to all Americans.
One of the most cherished freedoms is the freedom of movement, the ability to move freely and safely. But today that freedom was attacked. But we will restore that freedom throughout the national transportation system as soon as possible, and we will restore the highest possible degree of service. These terrorist acts are designed to steal the confidence of Americans. We will restore that confidence. We have already taken some first steps as a precaution.
And so while this is going on at the White House, this is what's happening at the Capitol of the United States. Janet Hassert, the Speaker of the House, has begun talking as congressmen and senators gather.
One thing that happens here in this place is when American suffers and when people perpetrate acts against this country, we as a Congress and as a government stand united, and we stand together. Senators and House members, Democrats and Republicans will stand shoulder to shoulder. Perpetrated on this nation. We will stand together to make sure that those who have brought forth this evil deed will pay the price. We're not sure who this is yet. But we have our suspicions. And when that is justified and when those suspicions are justified, we will act. We will stand with the President, we will stand with this government, and we will stand as Americans together through this time. Thank you.
Now on the steps of the Capitol, Tom Dasher, the Senate Majority Leader.
Today's despicable acts were an assault on our people and on our freedom. As the representatives of the people, we are here to declare that our resolve has not been weakened by these horrific and cowardly acts. Congress will convene tomorrow. And we will speak with one voice to condemn these attacks, to comfort the victims and their families, to commit our full support to the effort to bring those responsible to justice. We Republicans and Democrats, House and Senate, stand strongly united behind the President and will work together to ensure that the full resources of the government are brought to bear in these efforts. Our heartfelt thoughts and our fervent prayers are with the injured and the families of those who have been lost. We know as a nation, we've said our thoughts and prayers are with those families and those injured and those who are the casualties of today's attack. We also remember those thousands of people who are rescue workers. We ask now that we all bow our heads in a moment of silence and remembrance. Thank you.
Live from Washington on the steps of the Capitol of the United States, literally hundreds of members of Congress. We can't say that every member of Congress in the House and Senate was there, but hundreds were there in a show of solidarity and support, show of unity in the face of a sneak attack, the second in the lifetime of many of us, a sneak attack on the United States, this time by the shadowy personages who are part of the terrorism operation. There are a number of terrorism operations in the world. Osama bin Laden has been the focal point since 1998 of U.S. intelligence suspicions, but we've said it before, we repeat it without apology. No one knows who is responsible for these dastardly acts today. 3 of the World Trade Center buildings, the 2 Twin Towers and Building 7, destroyed at the World Trade Center. The Pentagon, dead, wounded, and destruction there. Now, coverage of the attack on America continues, including President Bush's address shortly, so stay right here with us.
Those individuals who have lost loved ones or do not know where their loved ones are in our prayers and are in our thoughts. Thank you all very much.
Well, there we are, a briefing from the White House in Washington, confirming what we've seen happening in New York and Washington today, the Pentagon under attack, 2 attacks in New York against the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center, detailing all the medical teams that will be going to assist those who've been injured in these attacks, and also the increased security, which was inevitably going to follow. It'll no longer be as easy as hopping on a bus to hop on an American domestic flight. Now, there are reports of explosions near the Afghan capital, Kabul. Reports say plumes of smoke can be seen coming from the direction of the airport to the north, and fires are burning. A Pentagon official has told the Reuters news agency the explosions are not the product of a U.S. strike. And in fact, we heard it ourselves from the U.S. Defense Secretary, who denied any American involvement in what's going on in Kabul tonight. Let's join our correspondent Kate Clark, who's across the border from Afghanistan in Islamabad. Kate, I know you're keeping close touch with what's happening in Kabul on the phone and so on. Can you first of all tell us about this attack tonight on the city?
Yes, there were 7 or 8 explosions overnight. People could see the lights in the sky from the explosions.
But there's no confirmation of that whatsoever. And if you're concerned about hearing some reports of U.S. missile strikes in Kabul, Afghanistan, didn't happen. According to senior U.S. officials, what happened in Kabul, Afghanistan, the pictures of explosion and fire there, had nothing to do with any U.S. missile attacks. There haven't been any U.S. missile attacks, while at least one news organization reported that missiles had hit Kabul, Afghanistan. It turns out to be not true.
That God really dealt with you about and made himself real to you about, and they look at you and say, how do you know that was God? So God said, all right, Moses, if my presence is...
In this country will somehow be touched by this catastrophe. We here at Fox SportsNet are no different. One of our colleagues, our friend, Tom Pecorelli, was among the passengers who perished on American Airlines Flight 11. We affectionately called him Uncle Tom around here, and he was one of the originals at Fox SportsNet. Tonight, with heavy hearts, we say goodbye to someone we not only worked with, but we loved, and offer our deepest condolences to his family and all of you who are touched by the tragic events of today. We now return to Fox News Channel's continuing coverage of the terrorist attack on the United States.
The only time I can remember in one day more Americans were killed was at the Battle of Antietam during the Civil War, and then 13, 14, 15,000. I forget the exact number.
I've heard 23,000.
Well, it was more. It's the only one where there were more. So this is a horrific case that's going to have to be dealt with a lot more defense spending.
Jim?
Absolutely. It is difficult to imagine any member of Congress after the events of this day standing up and saying we don't need more money for defense. I wouldn't be surprised if the president doesn't increase the amount of money he's asking for. He has already said, as far as spending Social Security money, that you could do that, though he is determined not to do it under ordinary circumstances. You could do it in the case of recession, war, or a severe emergency. You could certainly argue that today's events fit both the latter categories.
And what about such policies as missile defense, which is something that he wants? I was trying to get at that a little bit earlier in discussion with Senator Bob Graham as to whether finding out what we now have about the capacities of whoever did this, was it beyond belief now that such a person could launch missiles at the United States?
Boy, not at all. Remember, it was just a few months ago that a rubber boat filled with munitions was floated up against the USS Cole in Yemen. And it seemed as if the terrorists only had crude instruments like that. Well, we know better now. After hijacking 4 planes and flying, that was a direct hit at the Pentagon. Secretary Rumsfeld said it hit, the nose hit between the first and second floor of the Pentagon. Now, that is amazing. Look, if they can do this, and we know of their ballistic missile tests, missiles that can reach the United States are not far away, missiles with nuclear weapons.
While a missile defense wouldn't have stopped this kind of attack, it certainly emphasizes American sense of vulnerability. And that is at the bottom of this.
Well, as a political matter, one wonders if this attack simply means that anything that is under the rubric of national defense, safety from terrorist attack or foreign attack, doesn't become hard to resist at this stage.
Impossible. Today's events and expresses our heartfelt concern with this national tragedy. For more information, please turn to your TV news channel. In light of these events, QVC will be temporarily suspending its broadcast. To learn how you can help victims of today's national tragedy, QVC urges you to call the American Red Cross at 1-800-HELP-NOW. That's 1-800-435-7669. QVC acknowledges today's events and expresses our heartfelt concern with this national tragedy. For more information, please turn to your TV news channel. In light of these events, QVC will be temporarily suspending its broadcast.
A lot of latitude in the international community. In fact, the United States will probably receive far more support than it can handle from other countries, including some countries with whom its relations are not always the best. It may also be that other countries, for example, I could conceivably see the Soviet Union, Russia perhaps, offering,
straight. But what is essential is that the countries of the world who believe in democracy and human rights stand together. And the statements that have come out, I think, from other world leaders are very important. We all have to stand together. I ache for America tonight, but I know that we will rise to the challenge because we have the best system in the world.
Is there, given the earmarkings of this highly sophisticated, very coordinated attack, that some sort of state sponsorship was behind it?
I think it's tempting to speculate, Wolf, but I think that it's probably wrong at this time. to make statements that point the finger. We need to look at the facts very carefully and then respond at a time and place of our choosing. We have the best military in the world. I have the greatest confidence in our military, and I support President Bush. We are all waiting to hear what he has to say. I think the unity of this country is now essential.
But even at a time of unity, we've heard from many members of Congress, Democrats and Republicans today, members of Congress lamenting what they say was an enormous intelligence and security failure. Intelligence in the sense that the U.S. apparently had no advance indication that this was about to happen, and a security failure that 4 planes could be hijacked simultaneously.
I think we will have a lot of time for investigation and finger-pointing. I think today we need to offer our condolences to the families of the victims and the bravery of those who have rescued people, and remember that this country is a country of laws, and those who oppose us are only countries that do not believe in a system of laws and democracy and the individual freedom.
You just heard the Transportation Secretary, Norman.
Some economists are convinced a global recession is now a fait accompli. Overseas markets, which remained open today, all plummeted. London was off 5%. Frankfurt was down 9%. When the U.S. markets finally reopen, many expect they will be hit hard too. This economy has been walking a tightrope for months, and as Wells Fargo's chief economist said today, the terrorists just cut the wire. Dan?
Anthony Mason, of course our main concern is not money, not financial markets, it's those people who are dead and wounded. But holding to the moment, to this, the financial aspects of this, you've said that markets we know that we close tomorrow. Beyond that we don't know, but you would not be surprised to see them closed beyond that. What is the effect of these markets being closed?
Well, economists say just like it's important for the president to be back in the White House symbolically, it's important for the markets to reopen, to show that America is back to business as usual. That's very difficult. There are a lot of stock market employees who are unaccounted for this evening. So it's hard to get back to business as usual, but psychologically we need to do that to send a message to the world. And that's why they're hoping that as soon as they can, the markets will reopen.
Anthony, you spoke to one of the traders who was in the World Trade Center this morning. What did he tell you?
He was on the 84th floor of the second tower when the first plane hit the first tower. He was ordered to evacuate, and he did. He got down as far as the 50th floor, and in that second tower, they were actually told in the stairwell, they were given an all clear and said, the building is secure. He told me that some employees at that point actually left the stairwell, got on the elevator to go back up to work in the second tower. Within minutes, the second plane hit the second tower. He was down to the 30th floor at that point. He told me, he said, I thought my life was over, and I thought I was never going to see my children again. But he said, panic, there was no panic in the stairwell. People kept going down, he made it out. But when I last talked to him, he said the head trader of his floor was still unaccounted for.
Anthony Mason, thanks. Not everybody made it out, we know. It was confirmed by several eyewitness accounts. One man and woman forced to leap from a very high floor who went down hand in hand. This just in, a firefighters union official in New York, unidentified as far as I can determine, says, quote, there may be up to 200 firefighters, New York firefighters, dead. That's a direct quote. And let me underscore, as we've tried to do throughout this day, this terrible day, that while this is from someone in a position to know, there's no way to confirm this information. And also by the very nature of what he said, and specifically what this firefighters union official said, he said there may be up to 200 firefighters dead. Now, it's not a chaotic situation in all of New York or even all of Manhattan, but it remains a very dangerous situation in Lower Manhattan. A large section of Lower Manhattan has been completely sealed off, and there have been people ordered to evacuate even as night was falling. So it'll be a long time until we know, but here's another indication that we should be prepared for a very high death toll. Mayor Rudolph Giuliani began trying to prepare public opinion for that earlier in the day. We can hope and pray the death toll will not be anywhere near what's expected, but we should be prepared with that sort of steady determination that Americans are famous for mounting in the face of crisis, for a very high death toll when you have a firemen's union official talking about even the possibility of as many as 200 firefighters being dead. I emphasize again that that is unconfirmed, that is not an official figure, it is a speculative figure. Now, keeping in mind that all civilian aircraft remain grounded tonight, no airport in America is immune this evening from the fear that the East Coast crashes spawned, and that certainly includes the West Coast field that was the destination of so many of the doomed passengers. Sandra Hughes is at Los Angeles International Airport. Sandra?
Dan, California did not go untouched by these horrendous acts of terrorism. With all 4 flights en route to this state, there will be many, many California victims. Families of the American Airlines victims, surrounded by tight security, were whisked to a private area to be counseled by grief specialists from the airline and the Salvation Army.
There's very little that one can say at a time like this. We simply want to be with them and to comfort them as best we can.
But some people just needed to hold on. Confused passengers looking for guidance stood stunned. Most turned away as all domestic flights were canceled. International flights were to be diverted to nearby Ontario Airport until it closed too.
And I got here and I read the board and everything was canceled. So I have no idea what I'm going to do.
Most had just heard the news of the plane crashes and wondered how many had been killed. The scene was chaotic. Police tape held back anyone who tried to get inside the United Terminal as the LAPD bomb squad suited up outside. At a nearby power plant, a suspicious package brought panic. It was nothing. By mid-morning, the entire airport was evacuated.
The FAA mandated early on that we close down LAX and Ontario airports in California, which we have done.
Now, 2,000 flights per day come through the...
This story unfolded so quickly this morning. It was a little bit before 9 o'clock here on the East Coast, and we got word here in the newsroom of what sounded like a horrible accident, but an accident, a plane crashing into the World Trade Center. We all watched this story unfold live as it became much, much more than that, an attack on America. Here are some of the sights and sounds of a morning none of us will ever forget.
There's another one. I'm taking a look.
Oh my God!
Oh, another one just hit. Something else just hit. A very large plane just flew directly over my building, and there's been another collision. Went straight into one of the Twin Towers. It just disintegrated instantly. It was the most awful thing I've ever seen.
It straightened itself out and dove to the other side and crashed right in. An explosion was so terrific it looked like it had dynamite in it.
This is what is coming over our radio. Get out of the area. The second tower is coming down.
They tell you the second tower is
Yes, it's about to collapse.
I got fellow officers that might be trapped. I'm trying to be a hero, but I think if you were in this position, you'd do the same thing.
But there were people falling out of the sky. We were trying to get people away when the second collapse occurred, and I dove under a truck, so I don't know how I'm here.
Spent a year in combat. Never saw anything like this.
After the first tower collapsed, we were back in there trying to bring people out. We knew the second one was about to come down, but we were lifting one person, and when it came down, we all just ran for our lives.
You could hear the rumble, and when you looked up, you could see the top of the building disappointed. We all headed south, and you could feel the wind hitting in the back. The breeze hit.
Couldn't see, everything was totally black. You were just walking, hoping to find daylight. It was just unbelievable. I never seen anything like it in my life.
I'm just thinking about the firemen I see going up the stairs behind me and look at half of this building. I don't know.
Two 110 stories brought to the ground. World Trade number 7, a 47-story building brought to the ground. America, New York has absorbed some unbelievable news, and it is only going to get worse. We will be absorbing even worse news in the coming days. Police officer Tyrone Dux talking to AP from a triage center in Lower Manhattan. Quote, "New York is crying," said Dux himself in tears. And there it is. There's a picture of Lower Manhattan right now. All you can see is the grayness of the smoke. And there is a live picture from ground level in New York City. The city is virtually paralyzed. Some subway service, we're told, has resumed. There are no inbound tunnels or bridges. You can't get into New York right now, and the city is virtually blocked off below 14th Street. That's the beginning of Greenwich Village all the way south to the Battery. The numbers we have received throughout the day are sketchy. It is probably too horrible to even speculate as to what the total and final casualty figures will be. We do know that after the first plane hit the first #1 World Trade Center, there was a massive response of firefighters and rescuers. Little did they know a second plane would strike, and little did they know beyond that both of these towers would come crashing down. There are estimates from the head of the firefighters union here in New York City that as many as 200 firefighters may be dead, that there are entire fire department companies that have not been heard from. There are apparently feet and feet of rubble and dust in lower Manhattan. We were told a little after 7 o'clock Eastern time about 50 minutes ago, the rescuers began to work their way toward what everyone is referring to as Ground Zero in the search for what we hope will be survivors and what will most certainly be, in many cases, bodies. Former FBI investigator Cliff Van Zandt.
So far to date, they have been hampered in their emergency efforts because of the fire and the third building collapse. But one of the National Guardsmen told me that they expect that rescue efforts are going to begin in earnest tomorrow morning. And now, exactly how many people are buried under that rubble, dead or alive, still too difficult to say. We do know that some 50,000 people worked in the World Trade Center. And now the AP is reporting, Shepard, that of the 400 firemen who came here to help, 200 are feared dead, 78 policemen, New York City's finest, are missing. So no doubt we expect that the death toll is going to dramatically increase in the next few days. Mayor Giuliani says that's how long it is going to take to get some type of serious estimate as to how many people here actually died. One interesting note to all this that I think you alluded to a moment ago, the National Guardsmen here are not ignoring the fact that today's date is 9/11, and there are at least some here, Shep, who think that is no accident. Back to you.
David Lee Miller, Live Force in Lower Manhattan. United Airlines, American Airlines, 911, all symbols and attacking symbols of the United States, its pride, and even its freedom. This night there are people across the tri-state area of New York, across the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area in Virginia and Maryland, and folks across the country who had friends and relatives who were in these buildings who are wondering at this very hour whether their relatives are okay. So many in there at the moment that at this hour they simply cannot get a handle on who is where, who was where, who's missing, and who perished. That could take days, and this night the churches and synagogues and mosques of this community are loading up with people who are going to say a prayer for those who have been lost and the families of those left behind. Franklin Graham, son of the Reverend Billy Graham, has been carrying on his crusade as the Reverend Graham is resting. Franklin Graham, good to see you. Such a sad day for people around the world.
It is, and my prayers are with
100 American servicemen and women. Unless a miracle happened 2.5 miles south of here, we are looking at a death toll that could dwarf that. The largest act of violence in American history, Oklahoma City, 168 dead. More people than that died just in the plains. And when you and I as New Yorkers look and we realize the landscape of New York has changed, the Empire State Building is once again the largest building, I would suggest to you the landscape of America has changed. We are going to wake up tomorrow in a different country. Our luck has run out. 6 people died at the World Trade Center in '93. We saved thousands more because the buildings didn't collapse. We averted terrorist acts in the past, not today. And I think we will not get on an airplane the same way again. We will not feel the same way about our security again. I looked at some numbers, Paula. The largest number of American dead ever in one day in this country was Antietam, the Civil War battle in Maryland in 1862. 22,000 dead. I hope to God we don't approach that number when all is said and done, but we're going to be possibly in that ballpark. And I think tomorrow, in some ways, may even be a worse day than today because the sheer magnitude of this event has kind of got everybody just excited and wondering. Tomorrow, the reality sets in.
And I think you also talked earlier today how that reality turns from a sense of shock and in some cases a sense of outrage.
We've already heard how Absolutely.
than handed this country.
And one of the biggest issues we're going to be facing is drawing the line between a response that equals the horror of what was done and restraint.
All right, got to cut you off here and go back quickly to Wolf Blitzer. I think Dick Armey is joining you.
All right, Paula, just to remind our viewers that in a little bit more than a half an hour from now, President Bush will be in the Oval Office to address the American public. He's preparing his remarks right now, but our congressional correspondent, Jonathan Karl, is up on Capitol Hill, and he has the House Majority Leader, Dick Armey, with him. John?
Well, Wolf, an amazing day up here, and we just had about 200 members of Congress, Democrats, Republicans, senators, and members of the House on the steps of the Capitol with a message. Now, we have here the Majority Leader, Dick Armey, Republican leader in the House of Representatives. Mr. Armey, you were one of those in the top leadership of the Congress that were whisked away from the Capitol this morning to a secure location, a classified location. What was it like in that room all day today?
Well, we had the bipartisan leadership of both the House and the Senate. We were, of course, obviously, like everybody in America, seeking information, trying to understand exactly what's happening, where is it coming from, who's responsible, and how do we respond, measuring the threat to the nation and preparing ourselves to bring the members of Congress back to work at the appropriate time under the right circumstances and make the point that I made earlier. You may scar democracy, but you don't shut it down. We'll be back to work tomorrow. We think of this as a horrible criminal act. It is just inhumane. It's insane. And the American House and Senate, the Congress of this nation, as the President of this nation, will address that tonight. We will address the nation's business this week, and we will continue the process of finding the people who are responsible and bringing them to justice.
Now, I understand that at least 4 times during the day, the Vice President briefed the members of leadership that were in that room at that classified location. What did you learn about that 4th plane, the plane that landed in western Pennsylvania?
Well, we learned some things about that. At this point, the information is classified. It is clear that we do have a good investigation going forward. We are gathering information. There is a confidentiality on what we know, but we do know that this is a serious, premeditated crime, and that I can say without any doubt or hesitation is an international crime, and we will be able to find the people responsible in America. I believe, with the cooperation of all civilized nations, will bring these people to justice.
Now, over the Capitol Police radios this morning, there was a report that there was a plane headed for the Capitol building. What can you tell us about that? Was the Capitol in danger at any time during the day?
I don't know. We've tried to distill exactly what that report might have been. It could have been somebody's interpretation of the heading of either the plane that went to the Pentagon or the plane that went down in Pennsylvania. But there was a concern about the Capitol that caused Capitol Police, I think correctly and prudently, to vacate the building.
All right. Well, Mr. Leader, I thank you very much for joining us. And, Wolf, tomorrow both the House and the Senate will reconvene. Very much the message that wants to be sent here is that terrorism will not stop the people's business, the work of the Congress from going forward.
All right, Jonathan Karl on Capitol Hill, thank you very much, and thank Mr. Armey as well. I want to bring in Senator Bob Graham of Florida. He's the chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee. Of course, he's been receiving regular briefings throughout the day. We're hearing a lot of suspicions, Senator Graham, about who may have been responsible. Can you share what you know about that responsibility with our viewers?
I would agree with Madeleine Albright. It's premature at this point to be identifying who the prime suspect might be. The number of potential suspects based on the complexity of this operation is relatively small, and I think we will soon be able to identify who the culprit is, but tonight is not the night.
Has anybody definitively made any conclusions in the briefings with you and your colleagues about responsibility? Because, as you know, a lot of finger pointing at Osama bin Laden has been going on throughout the day.
No, at this point there has not been a single primary suspect identified.
Given the nature of this operation, the highly coordinated hijacking of these 4 airliners, is there some suspicion as well in the U.S. intelligence community that perhaps some government may also have been involved?
Again, it's premature to try to determine who did it and who their collaborators might have been. One thing we do know is that We are going to, as a result of this and other incidents, reassess our ability to identify and prevent this kind of event in the future. Right now, we're in the stage of responding to a horrendous event rather than where we should be, which is congratulating on ourselves in the fact that we identified and were able to interdict the culprits before they were able to act.
One of your colleagues on the Intelligence Committee, Senator Orrin Hatch of Utah, told us earlier today that as far as he had been informed, there was no...
In the World Trade Center, collapsing what was once one of the tallest buildings in the world, leaving a scene some described as a nuclear winter. Good evening, everyone. It was one of the darkest days in America through the day and into the night, and it is not over. New York and the nation will never be the same. What was once a symbol of America's might is tonight a scene of utter devastation. Piles of rubble, acres of gray ash, a death toll that some estimate could reach into the thousands. Hundreds of rescue workers, very little hope in the rubble of the World Trade Center. And this is the scene tonight at the Pentagon, hit by another hijacked plane shortly after the attack on the World Trade Center. The Pentagon says it does not yet know how many people were killed or injured. President Bush, facing the first and largest crisis of his presidency, one of the largest crises of any modern president, first got word of this attack while he was in Florida today. He then flew to a secure underground bunker near Omaha, the Strategic Air Command headquarters, before returning tonight to the White House and an address to the nation at 8:30. In a brief statement earlier, the president said freedom itself was attacked this morning and freedom will be defended. Make no mistake, he said, the United States will hunt down and punish those responsible for what he called these cowardly acts. Tonight, over the next 3 hours, we will be looking for answers to some of the questions we all were asking today. How could this happen? What do we do now? How can we prevent it from happening again? How will it change us? We start tonight with NBC's Campbell Brown, who joins us from near the White House. Campbell?
Tom, the president is now preparing his speech to the nation. Aides tell us it will be a message of resolve and...
With the legislative leadership of our country from both houses of Congress on both sides of the aisle saying just as clearly as we can that this was an attack on America. And the President of the United States is our president, and we will support him in whatever steps he deems necessary to take, both in the retaliation that will be called for, and also in the very important work of rebuilding New York and the Pentagon. We can't let these evil acts in any way deter us from, making it clear that the United States is resolute, and we are going to support the President.
And are you getting any new information from law enforcement out of New York about just the extent of the loss in New York?
John, I don't think we even have an inkling of the devastation. We've not really had the kind of coverage at ground zero that would show what I'm hearing. Rubble sometimes up to your waist. Our firemen and police officers wading through dangerous circumstances trying to see if there are any survivors. The numbers of people who are injured and who we fear are casualties, I think will be terrible once they are fully understood. I'm very proud of New York City. The mayor, the police, the fire, all the people working in the emergency front lines have done a superb job. But, New York is the global city. It's the symbol of American leadership, and, these terrorists made a direct hit on who we are as a people, and New York has responded, and the national government has to stand behind us.
And Senator, you had told us earlier that you had spoken at length with former President, your husband. What is Mr. Clinton saying?
Well, he's outraged and, deeply angry, as I think all of us are, but is absolutely behind whatever this administration chooses to do, because he knows how important it is to speak with one voice on behalf of our country. This is something that he and I believe strongly, having been on the other end of Pennsylvania Avenue. And let me say, too, that our country not only has to retaliate directly against those who perpetrated this attack, But we have to make it very clear that we cannot permit any state, any government, any institution or individual to pursue terrorist aims that are directed at the United States or any country with impunity. So I'm hoping that this is the kind of dramatic, terrible catastrophe that unites the entire civilized world, so that it's not just an attack on the United States, it's an attack on everyone who cares about, you know, freedom and dignity and justice and humanity.
Now, we're told that the Congress has never been evacuated before, not during the War of 1812, not during the Civil War. This was an extraordinary day. Of course, you are coming back. We had the display of unity on the steps of the Capitol. But is any business really going to be able to be done here? I mean, we've entered a new phase here, haven't we?
I don't think so, John. I think that
hanging out of windows 100 stories high. You could see smoke and flames behind them. They were trapped, looking down to see if there was anybody to help them. Of course, there wasn't. And I understand some of those people actually jumped out of the windows.
Right. When I first arrived on the scene, and I was split up into a unit with the New York City Fire Department, they, I believe, were going to have us start going to get some of the people that were jumping. They were, when I got there was people, I'd say about 10 people jumping from the top of the building out.
And of course they were killed instantly because there was really nowhere for them to jump to except for concrete.
They were jumping from levels that were so high there's no way they would.
Right, and there's just no way authorities could have gotten them, but it was either that or I guess another form of death. That's what stayed with me, Dan. We're seeing it now on the screen, these poor, poor people. Now, when you spoke, did any of them feel anger? Did any of them feel, you see, I'm trying to get to the emotion of people that you worked on.
It was more just why people just kept saying why, oh my God, and more fear for those who didn't get out. I think the anger probably came a little later when they had time to calm down, but people were just confused, shocked, and really worried about everyone else who hadn't made it out.
Right, and their own families too, allowing people to know that they're alive. Mm-hmm. People think when something like this happens that it's very orderly, but it isn't. It's just a whole bunch of rescuers there trying to do whatever they can on the spur of the moment, correct?
It was, when I first got there, it was actually quite orderly. I was very impressed. They instantly set up command posts. Like I said, they put me on what they call the fast team with two other EMTs from New York City Fire Department. We were going to go in fast, grab as many people as we can, get them out fast. What happened was, as the first and second towers came down, it came down on top of all the orders. So the command post, the treatment area, everything was covered, and from that point on, it was pretty much chaos.
Did you see anybody get buried by debris when it came down? They couldn't get away?
Well, I didn't see them get buried because we were running as fast as we could, but I know that a lot of people did not make.
And the reason that you ran again was that you heard a noise and looked up and saw.
The first time I heard what sounded like, I thought it was another airline. It sounded like a jet about to land basically on our heads. It turned out it was the building coming down.
And you saw it, physically saw it?
Yeah, we heard it first, looked up and saw it, and just started running. The second time, someone actually yelled, "The tower's leaning, the tower's leaning." Everybody just dropped what they were doing and ran.
All right, Dan. Well, we're glad you're safe, and we appreciate the good work you did both as a journalist and as an EMT, and I'm sure that the people that you helped appreciate it as well. I want to go now to freelance photographer Tim Hinton, who barely escaped with his life, and who took some of the most dramatic photos of people who were trapped in the building. Mr. Hinton, sights and sounds, what stays with you above all else?
I think what stays with me the most is after the first building collapsed, I spoke to a few firemen who were heading into the other building, quite bravely, selfishly, and they grabbed their gear and they went right back in, and I'm sure those guys have passed now. I think the image of those fallen firemen going in is what sticks with me.
Now, you got down there pretty quickly, responded to it. Dan said at first it was pretty orderly, and then when the building started to collapse, all chaos broke out because obviously all the command centers were buried.
Well,
Go ahead.
I was on the west side of the buildings during the collapse, and
When the buildings came down, it was quite hectic. People were running for cover. We were caught in darkness for a few moments. And then as the dust cleared, me and the firemen were trying to get their gear together so that they could do their jobs. And they were all in shock. They didn't quite know what to do. How to react.
Nobody would. Now we're going to show some of your pictures here that you took of these poor people up there. Tell me, as a photographer, I mean, you've seen a lot of terrible things.
Right.
Is it hard to take a picture of somebody who's going to die in about 10 seconds?
Yeah, I mean, the first couple of jumpers that I saw, I resisted shooting them. I just didn't think it was right. I just actually didn't even think of the fact that I had a camera on me. Then after a few moments, I thought, well, this is what I'm here. I want to show. At that point, I didn't know it was terrorism. I thought it was an accident or something. I really had very little information on the ground there. And I just wanted to show kind of what was happening so that people could see it and that it wouldn't be forgotten.
When you were working and you were photographing, could you hear other people around you and the panic? And did that register while you were trying to shoot your photographs?
Well, it was eerily quiet. The policemen and the firemen were very civilized, very orderly. I think what sticks with me the most is the sprinkling of the glass as it was falling off the World Trade Center and the occasional thump of a body hitting the ground. I think that's really what sticks with me, are those sounds.
Yeah. How close were you to getting hurt?
Well, at one point I was about 80 yards away from the World Trade Center. I think it was Tower 1, the one with the antenna. And a fireman yelled at me, a captain, get out of here, get out of here. And I said, oh, these guys have to do their job, and I left. And about 30 seconds later, I removed myself about 100 yards. That's when the building came down onto about 2 dozen fire trucks where I had been formerly.
So you were very lucky to move when you did.
I wouldn't have moved. I thought I was in a great position to get some shots where I was, unless that fire captain said something to me.
Has that registered that you almost were killed?
Yeah, it's registered that I almost died twice, and that, if that fireman hadn't said anything to me, I wouldn't be here right now.
All right. Thanks, Tom. We appreciate you coming in very much.
Okay.
Now, I'm going to go to David Lee Miller, who is now currently in Lower Manhattan, because there are still people, according to Mayor Giuliani, alive, buried in the rubble. And there's a problem, David, to get to those people right now, correct?
Very much so. In fact, we're told by one of the National Guardsmen that the rescue efforts in earnest really won't begin until tomorrow at this hour, Bill. And you can see it happening behind me. They're bringing in all this heavy equipment from all over the Northeast, it appears, to really begin what's going to be a very massive digging operation. But up until now, they were very concerned about this World Trade Building number 7 that collapsed at about 5:40. That building, which was in flames, prevented the authorities from getting to those who were trapped, both the dead and those who were still living.
All right. Now, how far are you away right now from where they believe people are alive?
I'd say we're about 7 or 8 blocks away. It's hard for you to see, in fact, but you can hear the sirens. I don't know why there are sirens at this hour, but there are still emergency vehicles down here in Lower Manhattan. There is no electricity at this hour, and there's an eerie sort of glow right in front of the World Trade Center where they do have the emergency equipment and the battery-powered lighting set up. But that is where, at this hour, there are presumably survivors trapped under tons and tons and tons of rubble. The only thing that I can sort of liken this to is the embassy bombings in Nairobi, which I got to report on. But this is the scale of this is just so much more.
Yeah, sure. I mean,
combined with the fact,
we're going to look at,
fact, of course.
We're going to look at, David, when this is all over, it looks like we're going to look at in excess of 10,000 dead here in America. Now, yourself, first, one more question about the survivors. Why are they not digging for people who may be alive and under the rubble tonight? Why are they not doing that tonight? Because they fear other buildings are going to fall down?
Earlier, that's what we were told by one of the National Guardsmen. Now, we were told that they were trying to get some of those who were trapped out from underneath the rubble, but it was not the same effort that we believe will be underway tomorrow. I think up until now, Bill, it has been simply too dangerous. I also believe that they didn't have the right equipment. You can't be digging through this stuff with your bare hands. It's going to take some of this specialized equipment, cranes and tractors that will be brought in here. Otherwise, I think there's the risk that some of those who are trapped and the rescuers themselves could be harmed.
Okay, and we might tell the audience that around the World Trade Center, one building has already collapsed and some structures have been weakened. So authorities do not know how strong those structures are, whether they will collapse, and obviously they have to be very deliberate. Now, David, I heard you earlier today. You were almost hurt as well as Tom Hinton was